Welcome to the Buddhistisches Tor Berlin podcast. Here we share talks and reflections from our Buddhist center in Berlin, exploring themes such as meditation, ethics, and the path of awakening in everyday life. We are part of the Triratna Buddhist community, and our talks are offered freely in a spirit of generosity. We hope this episode supports your practice and your life.
The title of the talk is called Metta and the Three Myths. So this is what we're going to be looking at for the next little while. So we've just done the practice, we've just done the Metta Bhavana practice. So that's what we're going to be looking at. But to start with, to get us into it, I want to just say something a little bit about Buddhism more generally. So you could say that Buddhism starts with the Buddha. Buddhism starts with the enlightenment experience of the Buddha. And there's also us in relationship to that. So in a sense, you're here because you think Buddhism has got something interesting to say, something helpful to say. But if you're a Buddhist, then what you're looking to do is you're looking to close the gap between yourself, where you are, and the Buddha, the enlightenment experience. So that's what the whole of Buddhism is about, really. It's about how do we close that gap through various teachings, through various meditations, through various perspectives, through ethics. And there are lots of different ways of doing that. And there's a kind of senior order member, someone ordained within our tradition called Subhuti, and he gave a paper quite a while ago, and he called that paper The Three Myths of the Spiritual Life. So what he was looking at was like different ways that Buddhism is formulated and the different perspectives. And I suppose you could even say the advantages and disadvantages of each perspective, really. So what I'm interested in today is trying to get a sense of how do those three myths, how or maybe can they relate to the Metta Bhavana? So could we look from this perspective of these three myths at the Metta Bhavana? So I suppose it's a different way of looking at metta, at least some of it. And we're actually we've got one more week of a meditation course that I've been doing. So we've been doing a meditation course at the centre on loving kindness. And this is what we've been exploring. Part of what we've been exploring on this course is, can we take this particular perspective and can we apply it to loving kindness, and what does that look like? So that's been very interesting, actually. I suppose, in a way, today's going to be a bit more theoretical, although I'm going to talk about various approaches to meditation. But ideally, what you need to do is you need to go away and you need to try these things out and see how that kind of works sort of within your experience. So to start us off, in terms of metta, what I want to do is read a definition. So the definition comes from Sangharakshita. So he's on the shrine. He's my teacher. He's the kind of founder of this particular tradition. And in a book called Living with Kindness, he's got this definition of loving kindness, which I think is very useful, because for me, sometimes I kind of have this sense of like, what is metta? Do I know what it is? And then the definition gives me a bit of a sense of, oh, this is what I need to be doing. Yeah, it's a very clear kind of way of looking at it. So I'm going to read this to you. So what he says is the Pali word metta, or maitri in Sanskrit, is related to mitta, or Sanskrit mitra, which means friend. Metta can thus be translated as friendliness or loving kindness. Developed to its full intensity, Metta is a down-to-earth care and concern directed to all living beings equally, individually, and without reservation. The unfailing sign of metta is that you are deeply concerned for the well-being, happiness, and prosperity of the object of your metta, be that a person, an animal, or any other being. When you feel metta for someone, you want them to not just be happy, but deeply happy. You have an ardent desire for their true welfare, an undying enthusiasm for their growth and progress. So that's how Sangharakshita defines it. So, yeah, we've just done the Metta Bhavana practice. So some of you, well, actually, saying that, nobody said that they were here in the beginning, so I don't really know what you was doing, kind of when you was meditating. Obviously, I led you in a little bit, the people that were in here. But generally, I would say the way, like personally, that when I teach the Metta Bhavana, the way I tend to teach it is using phrases. Yeah, it's, in a certain sense, it's the most simple, concrete, straightforward way to teach the practice. It's not the only way to teach the practice, but it also gives you a very strong sense, again, of what loving kindness is. So I think it's very important, in a way, to do it this way. So you'll know, and maybe there's a few variations in the way some people teach, but the way I tend to teach it myself, the phrases that I use are, may I or may they be well, may I or may they be happy, may I or may they be free from suffering, may I or they be grow and develop. So this is our kind of starting point, and in a way, what this approach, or this approach, you could say, is more developmental, or it's more to do with cultivation. So we're kind of in this first sort of myth. Yeah. At the bottom, you've got this little meditating person, and what you might not be able to see is that inside the person there's an S and a C. So the S and the C stands for self-centeredness or self-clinging. So to some degree, when we start the practice, there will be that there, yeah, some sense of self-clinging, some sense of what did I say? The last one was self-centeredness. Yeah. And in a way, the practice itself is trying to move us in a direction where there is less of a sense of self-clinging and less of a sense of self-centeredness. And the way we do that is by using these various kind of phrases. So, and you could say that it's like we start the practice with a sense of absence, as in there isn't a sense of loving kindness there, or not very much. And what we do is we use the phrases to cultivate that, or to develop loving kindness. I think it's interesting, actually, with the phrases, kind of over time, also to get a sense of, to kind of ask the question, well, what do they mean? What do they mean for you? And do they actually work? What I mean by that is, well, maybe it's quite straightforward. May I or may they be well. What I'm looking for in the practice is a sense of well-being, a sense of well-being in myself, a sense of well-being in the other person. That's what I'm wishing for them. Something very basic, a sense of feeling alive and vital, energized, awake. Sort of, in a certain sense, well, you know what that feels like when you've got a sense of well-being. Then there's the phrase, may I be happy, or may they be happy. So I suppose I'm saying this partly because this is how it was for me. So that particular phrase didn't kind of resonate in a sense. Like that kind of the idea of happiness, I was a bit like, well, what is that? What do I mean when I'm saying that? So I suppose it's like, if that is the case, if there's one of the phrases that you're saying that it just doesn't, you don't kind of resonate with it, well, you've got to get a sense of, well, what does that mean then? So I suppose where I got to with that was like, actually what it means is, or when I'm happy, I tend to feel at ease, I tend to feel content. So then that it tends to be, again, also when I'm teaching, the phrase that I tend to introduce. So may I or may they be at ease, or may I or they be content. With that sense that actually when the person experiences that, or when I experience that, then there is a sense of happiness. You can also imagine that more imaginatively, the person, what it's like to feel happy, expanded, or them feeling expanded. With the third phrase, may I be free from suffering, may they be free from suffering. Again, at some point that started to give me some problems. So I suppose in a way, what we tend to recommend is you learn the two meditation practices, the mindfulness of breathing and Metta Bhavana, and you do them daily, alternating. So that's what I did for years and years and years, those two practices, alternating the two practices. But at some point, that particular phrase, may they be free from suffering, gave me some difficulty, partly because we suffer, and that just keeps on happening, doesn't it? It's kind of like you can see that people just keep on suffering, and I'm wishing for this absence of that. So what does that actually even mean then? So what kind of got clarified for me over time was that actually what I'm wishing is not for the person to be free from pain, because pain is inevitable by the fact that we're human, but actually to be free from suffering. So suffering meaning when I experience pain, or when they experience pain, and when they resist pain, or when I resist pain, then suffering arises. So in a sense, what I would say that I'm wishing in with that phrase is that relationship changes. So the relationship to pain changes. So sometimes the phrase that I would use then would be something like, when the person experiences pain, may that be met with kindness. So changing this kind of relationship with pain. And then the last phrase is very big, actually. And in a certain way, I sort of also think of the phrases as a bit of a kind of progression. So the last phrase is, may they be, and what is it? Yeah, may they grow and develop. May they grow and develop. I think there's another bit, wasn't there? Prosper. That's what you said. Is it prosper? So I suppose this sense of the way I tend to think of that is that everybody has a vast potential for change and growth. And what I'm wishing is that they somehow find a way to enter that space, to kind of become that. Yeah. Maybe that's not completely within the development bit, but anyway, that's the sort of the sense of it. It's very kind of big and broad and open. Even in a sense, you could say right the way up to the point of Buddhahood. Yeah? So just do another little drawing. So you could say that with this approach, there's a few things that's happening. So one of them is you're using effort, you're doing something, you're using the phrases, and in a sense you're with the intention that you become bigger and better. In a certain sense, you become more loving, more kind, yeah? So you're definitely doing something, so it's active. And in a sense, you could even, it's active and it requires effort. Yeah, so maybe I'll just leave that there as it is for now. And then I'm going to move on to the second sort of myth. Yeah. So the second myth is surrender. So actually one thing that I didn't say was when you've got this sense of kind of closing the gap between yourself and Buddhahood, you could say that there are two main ways of doing that. So one of them is that you become the Buddha. So that's a sort of more, you're developing yourself in that direction. The other way of looking at it is more like the Buddha becomes you. And that splits off into kind of two or maybe more. So one way of talking about that is surrendering. And another way of talking about that is discovering. So I'm going to say a little bit about surrendering. And how, and also kind of how might you work with this in the Metta Bhavana. So now again, it's probably going to depend a little bit on a few things. So whether you consider yourself a Buddhist, or whether you're up for using the methods of Buddhism, that's kind of important or not. The reason why I'm saying that is that in this, with surrendering, how you would be imagining loving kindness is that loving kindness is outside and you are receiving it, or you're surrendering to it. So there's lots of different ways of doing that. So if, I suppose in a way, you probably have to do a little bit of work to begin with. But at least all of us have got some sense of the Buddha. Yeah, we've got some sense of the Buddha. We've got some sense that the Buddha was enlightened. But also within the Buddhist tradition, as it kind of developed over time, you've got a whole pantheon of archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that appeared. Yeah. So not just the Buddha Shakyamuni, Avalokiteshvara, Green Tara, Padmasambhava, many figures, yeah, with lots of different qualities that are all embodiments of enlightenment. So what I'm saying is that with this particular myth, what you're imagining is that the Buddha, or one of these figures, embodies fully loving kindness from the perspective of an awakened being. So the Buddha, or one of these figures, has it, and in a way, all you're doing, or what you could play with, is you're just opening to that. You're surrendering to that. So what that would actually mean in the practice itself is that you would have an image. Yeah. So at the moment I'm talking about a Buddha image. I'll say something about other images in a minute. And what you can actually play with is just, well, there are two things actually. So one of them is that you receive the loving kindness, or you and the other person receives the loving kindness. So you're not actually doing very much. So the mood, you could say, of this particular myth is more passive or more receptive, and it's requiring less effort. The other possibility, I would say, with this is that it gives you an opportunity of shifting your perspective. So this is kind of what I've been sort of playing around with a bit more. So particularly with when you get to the other people, the kind of the neutral person, the difficult person, as you bring that person to mind, that person is neutral for you, or that person is difficult for you. So the reason why they are as they are is to do with your relationship. So with this kind of approach, if you take the perspective of the Buddha or one of the other figures, they have got a completely different relationship with this person. And I think this is the kind of the beauty in a way of the imagination, actually. So when we do things like chant mantras, when we do Buddhist ritual, when we do puja, when we have some imaginative connection with these figures, strangely enough, we can experience, I would say, a flavour of what they represent. So it's kind of like we get a flavour or a whiff or a scent of awakening. So the possibility with this, working with this myth, is that you can shift your perspective, and the way the figure is relating is completely different than your own. So it's not neutral, and it's not in a state of conflict, because actually it's the Buddha that we're talking about. So I suppose as an example of this, so this is one of the things that we was doing on the meditation course, and the figure that I took up as a visualization practice when I got ordained was a figure called Padmasambhava. So during the Metta Bhavana practice, I was imagining Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava was who I was receiving loving kindness from. And then it got to the fourth stage of the practice. So obviously I can feel in that fourth stage my relationship with this person. And there's some sense of, even if it's not quite conflict, it's not complete friendliness. There's a sort of, there's a barrier, there's a gap, there's a tension between me and this particular person. But Padmasambhava was very pleased to see them. So I suppose what I'm saying is that over time, by bringing to mind these figures, your perspective can shift. Yeah, and then also you can learn to shift your perspective. That's a possibility. It's a possibility in your daily life. So it's not just me that's relating to this figure. In a certain sense, the whole thing anyway is always happening within our mind. It's kind of like it's the Buddha relating, or it's the Padmasambhava relating, or it's Green Tara relating, is a possible shift with this kind of self-surrender or surrender. So, oh yeah, I missed one thing out. So, what I said to the people that was doing the meditation course with was that, so I don't know, like whether they consider themselves Buddhists or not, or whether they've got a kind of a sense of faith, you could say, towards the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So maybe that's not the case, for everybody there that's on that course. So what do you do then? I'm telling you to visualize a Buddha figure, or this is what we was doing. So the other option was actually to just use the image of the sun. So it's a symbol, and it has some advantages, the sun. Maybe some of you already at times have done that when you've been doing the Metta Bhavana. It's kind of like that sense of the sun is there. The sun, particularly in the fifth stage, the sun shines equally on everybody. It's not picking and choosing between like and dislike. It's just shining. So this is the kind of partly another way in if you wanted to come more at it from this particular approach. But you would have to have a sense that the sun somehow embodies loving kindness, because this is what we're wanting to cultivate. There's something else going through my mind, but I'll come back to it after I get to the third myth. So this one's a little bit more like that. So the B is the Buddha or Bodhisattva. Maybe it's the sun or whatever. And you're receiving. Another interesting thing for me about this actually was that when I was doing the fourth stage, I don't know if I'm going to repeat myself here. When I was doing the fourth stage, there was a kind of sense of like the way that I was positioned in relationship to the person when I was coming more from this perspective was more like side by side rather than like this, kind of facing in a sense. And it was kind of like both of us just receive. So that's what I was imagining. I'm receiving the loving kindness from Padmasambhava or the Buddha, and they are as well actually. And I'm not doing anything. Which again can take you outside of the dynamic that you have with the particular person, particularly the neutral and the difficult person. So anyway, that's the more surrender. So then we get to discovery. It's a little bit harder to talk about actually. And in some respects, this is probably the myth that I questioned whether can you do the Metta Bhavana in this kind of way or not, actually. So with this myth, the starting point, so the starting point with the first myth development is not so much metta, and I cultivate it and develop it, and then I become more mettaful. The second myth is more that metta is outside, and I open myself to it. It kind of comes in, I'm receptive to it. With the third myth, it's more saying that, so some people would say that it is inside, but actually I think probably closer to it is probably more like it's here now. So that is your starting point. That is the way you're framing the practice. Metta is here now. Maybe in a certain sense, that's enough. And then you see, well, what is your actual experience like? So maybe your experience isn't loving kindness at the moment, but you have this idea, this is what you're working with, that metta is here. So what do you need to do to access that? Well, because the starting point is self-clinging or self-centeredness, what you need to do is you need to relax. You need to notice how the self-clinging is manifesting in the moment and relax that. Now, I'm not saying that you're necessarily going to get this, but I'm giving you what I think this particular myth is. The other way to think about it is that metta is here now because metta is kind of inherent within the mind or within the heart. But then you've got to get a sense of, well, what do I mean then by the mind or the heart? How am I going to get a sense of this? So how I've done this myself is that, first of all, I'm getting a sense that the mind is not a thing. It's nothing that I can grasp. And it's got three qualities from a certain perspective of Buddhism. So the first quality is that the mind is spacious or open. So that is one of the things that you can establish within your practice. This is partly why when I teach meditation, that I get people to pay attention to the space, so the space of the room. Because as you get a sense of the space of the room, the mind occupies the space. The mind is the space, in a way. And what is interesting about that is that space, as this room does, accommodates. So space accommodates, it allows things to be there, and it is not in a relationship of judgment with anything that is here. So the mind is like space. It's not in a relationship of judgment, it's just open. The second quality is that the mind is clear. So there's a clarity within that spaciousness, is also a clarity. And the third quality is that the mind is sensitive. So this to me is where the loving kindness comes in. And in a sense, if you're talking about discovery, who knows what you might discover in a certain sense, but how I've been tending to see this is that the mind is open and spacious. Whatever comes into the mind is, as it arises, it is met with sensitivity. That is actually there. Sensitivity is there. As something arises, responsiveness is there. As something arises, kindness is there, or tenderness is there. And this is the sort of quality that I'm looking for within the practice. As I bring the person to mind, the neutral person, can I notice this sensitivity or not in relationship to them, or this responsiveness in relationship to them? As I bring the difficult person to mind, sensitive to all of what happens in relationship to that. So we're bringing to mind a mental image, and maybe we start to have felt responses to that mental image, and maybe we have story related to that mental image. But can I be in a relationship to all that, which is not about kind of pushing that away, particularly in the fourth stage? Yeah. If pushing away is happening, can I have a sense that sensitivity comes into relationship with pushing away? Yeah. The mind is open and spacious, not judging. And can I have a sense that sensitivity is there? Yeah. And if it isn't, can I relax? Because actually generally, this sense of kind of self-clinging or self-centeredness, the way it's experienced is as some kind of tension. We're in some kind of tension relationship with the other person. And when that is kind of seen or felt, then that can be relaxed. So again, this particular kind of model is a lot more on the passive or receptive end. Yeah. Now it's a little bit. I think maybe the advantage of the fact that we've got the three models is that we can use the three models, and I think this sometimes people for one reason or another, find their way into a particular way of looking. And part of the reason why I was reading the definition at the beginning is that I do think we need to have a clear understanding of what loving kindness is and what loving kindness looks like. So this is partly why the developmental model is so useful, because it's very clear what we're doing. Yeah, may I be well, may I be free from suffering, may I grow and develop, may I be happy. It's quite solid and tangible. Yeah, as we move more into kind of the other two, I would say you probably need a reasonable amount of presence. With the second one, you probably need faith. It's a lot more subtle. You're working a lot more of a subtle way. So in a way, it's kind of like, even if you decided, okay, so I'm going to just try, I'm going to play today. I'm going to play with this idea that Arthaketu talks about of surrender. I'm going to have a sense of the Buddha. I'm going to see what it's like just to receive, yeah? Or I'm going to play with this sense that loving kindness is just there. But then your experience is nothing, blank. So either you stay with that and relax and see what happens and see whether you get a sense of the qualities that I'm talking about, or you just go back to what we know, which is like, what happens then if I wish this person well? May they be well. Does that get things kind of moving a bit? So one last thing that I'll say about this is kind of more like potential pitfalls of each of the ways of working. So, and also like when you're in one model, how you tend to view the other two models. Like, I think that's quite interesting. So, obviously, one of the things which is very strong here with the developmental is effort and will. Yeah. So this is how we're practicing. We're practicing with a lot more effort and will. But at some point, that can become too much. And actually, we sort of feel like we're grinding it out. We're kind of grinding through the practice. We've lost that sense of receptivity. It's not as black and white in a certain sense as putting it into three models, because in a certain way, it's a lot more fluid, the practice. But in a way, that's one thing to look out for, that the practice just becomes, maybe what happens in the end is you just give up. You've tried and tried and tried, and you don't feel like you've getting anywhere, and you give up. You prioritize the mindfulness of breathing. You stop doing the Metta Bhavana because it just feels as if you're banging your head against a wall. And I definitely know kind of like practitioners, more long-term practitioners, that have hit that wall, and actually, in the end, felt quite resentful of the fact that they felt as if they'd been taught in a particular way. And it's not great, is it, really, to be blaming the people that taught you? But that's what I've noticed, that can be a tendency. It's like, it hasn't worked, and it hasn't worked because I haven't been told that actually there's another way of doing the practice. So I suppose another thing I would say that when you're here, if this is your dominant view and your dominant way of working, there can be a sort of distrust of receptivity, and more the passive end of things. Yeah, because you're all about striving and getting somewhere. It's so important actually to strive and get somewhere. This is what you read when you read the life of the Buddha. But it's not the only thing that's going on in our spiritual lives. So that's the development bit. Then in terms of surrender, I would say the danger, there's a few dangers that Subhuti mentions. But actually, the thing that came to mind for me was more, it's not something that he says, it's actually more about that you get lost in fantasy. So this is something that can happen in the Metta Bhavana. You do the practice in a particular way, that you're using the imagination a lot, and actually it's a kind of fantasy. This is why I think you have to check it back with probably the first thing, because it's like there is a concreteness about loving kindness. It expresses itself in the world. You are more kind, you're more tolerant, you're more generous. You do things for other people. It's not completely passive. But anyway, the kind of, I do think one of the dangers is that the imagination becomes more fantasized. So you're in this imaginative world that's not got much connection with reality. Now, it's a little bit tricky because when the imagination opens up, you don't know how it will open up. So what for one person might look like fantasy or be fantasy, for another person, they might be right in, they're really with loving kindness. They've really, that whatever is happening imaginatively is really opening something up and shifting quite a lot of stuff, really. But anyway, that was the thing that kind of came to mind in relationship to that. And then with the discoverer, this is sort of like, again, something that I've sort of observed a bit, is that there can be, if you go too far into that, there can be a distrust of the imagination, and there can be a distrust of effort. Because from this perspective, there's nothing to do. And the imagination, this is the way it's seen, is just a fabrication. It's just imagined. But I would say that is going too far, actually. But it does happen. The more that I've seen this, that there can be those things, a distrust of the imagination and a distrust of effort. So I suppose sometimes this is also why amongst Buddhists there can also be tension. Yeah? Because if somebody's over here looking from this perspective, which is all to do with effort and striving, and someone is over there and they're to do with like, well, you don't need to do anything. It's just relax. Kind of, you just need to discover kind of awakening. Well, then there can be quite a lot of conflict, actually. So I suppose it's probably worth saying that in terms of like, so you know, do you know which view you're looking through, really? That is important. Yeah, so I suppose to finish, well, in a way, the way we're tending to do the Metta Bhavana is more developmental. So in a sense, you probably know what that looks like. Yeah, you know how to use phrases and or what happens with that, and that it works. Hopefully, you know it works. But with the other two models, it could be something that you try out and see what happens. And it could just be as simple as, what I'm going to get a sense of, or try to get a sense of, is just that loving kindness is outside and I'm going to receive it. That's the second model. Or loving kindness is here. What is it like to have a sense of that? Is that a possibility? Yeah? And kind of see what happens. That's it.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this talk, you are warmly invited to visit Buddhistisches Tor Berlin in Kreuzberg. We offer meditation, Dharma talks, and courses that support practice in everyday life. You'll find more information in the episode description.